Welcome to How the Song Came to Be, where soulful songwriters share the stories behind their songs, as well as tools and creative practices you can use to bring your best songs or other creative works to life. I'm Anneheaton, your host.
I'm really interested in finding the magic in the little things, finding the magic in those ordinary moments, because there is, so much magic in there. And this album that is coming out in a little bit is very much kind of about that.
Welcome, songwriters. I'm Anneheaton, your host and founder of Soul Song School. We are here today with Joshuadavis. Joshuadavis is a tried and true Michigan musician. Joshuadavis has been a top 3 finalist on NBC's The Voice, sung duets with both Sheryl Crow and Adam Levine, and was the first artist on the show to sing an original song. Davis grew up surrounded by the urban landscapes of Detroit while spending summers in the wilderness on the southern tip of Lake Superior. Both areas are the backdrop for his latest work. His new release, The Way Back Home, produced by Steve Berlin of Los Lobos, reflects an honest, hardworking family man scribing the scenes of life through the dark, broken, hopeful, and triumphant times. Joshuadavis has shared the stage with American folk music icons such as Pete Seeger, Arlo Guthrie, Greg Brown, and Abigail Washburn. The Way Back Home highlights Davis's collaboration with legendary engineer Glenn Brown, Jack White's bassist Dominic John Davis, pianist Mike Lynch, and drummer Mike Shimon. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Over the years, Davis has toured extensively with his band Steppin' In It, who've released 5 albums, and as a solo act, Davis has released 5 albums as well. His rough and tumble grit mixes with an undeniable Midwesterner's charm. The Way Back Home is a very personal look at where he's been and who he's become. Welcome to the show, Joshua.
Thanks, Anne. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so happy you're here. I hope it was okay to read your bio.
No, that was great. I haven't heard it in a little while, so
just remember who you are.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's so much to dive into here. I'm excited to hear about the writing of your latest record, but will you start us off with a song?
Happily. Yeah, I'll play you one of the tunes from the new record. This is a song called, I've been playing a lot lately. I recorded it and then I kind of sat on it for a little while and didn't play it. But I've been kind of digging it lately. It's called Nowhere Without You. That day when my roommate had you over for a while, cool and sweet in the summer heat, green eyes and that crooked smile, you were reading Dante. I tried to play cool, honey, you left me out. I'm breathless, sounding like a fool. These memories, pictures on my shelf, keep me company. Since you left me by myself, I'm walking the floor. I don't know what to do. Wearing down in circles, going nowhere without you. That autumn in the orchard, using your umbrella as a cane. The 2 of us in the falling leaves, and I couldn't feel pain. Red and gold and orange, never healed all the way. I'm moving fine, but in my mind I just can't walk away from these memories. Pictures on my shelf keep me company. Since you left me by myself, I'm walking the floor. I don't know what to do. Wearing out in circles, I'm going nowhere without you. Nowhere now and nowhere there. I'm learning how and I'm stumbling. All these words I want to say keep me hanging on day after day. Yeah. Ooh. Blowing donuts in the winter, In the resurrection parking lot, close your eyes and feign surprise. I said, I think that's all this old boy's got. You made the perfect fallen angel. I wouldn't show you mine. If I could do it again, I'll let you into my only turn back time. These memories, pictures on my shelf, keep me company. Since you left me by myself, I'm walking the floor. I don't know what to do. Wearing down in circles, I'm going nowhere with you. I'm going nowhere, going nowhere. I won't nowhere without you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
That's early morning grit.
Going nowhere without you. I love that. Thank you
Thanks.
so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd love to start the way that with a question that I ask everyone who comes on the show, which is how and why did you start writing songs? What compelled you to begin?
Yeah, it's a great first question. I think that I started playing music because of I grew up going to in a few different ways. Music was involved in my life. I guess in my early years, I grew up going to music festivals. I grew up partially in Detroit, mostly in Detroit with my mom, and yeah, in the summers and vacation time from school, I was in Michigan's Upper Peninsula with my dad, who lived up there in Marquette County. And so with my mom, I would go to all these music festivals at Hart Plaza in Detroit. They had tons of music festivals down there, put on by WDT, many of them. And then there was a music festival called Hiawatha Music Festival up in Marquette, Michigan, that I went to every summer with my dad. And there's a guy named Frank Youngman there, who is an incredible guy, was a music teacher in Cadillac for years and years, but kind of ran the kids music scene there, and put on this big kids parade with these musicians, all these instruments, and we'd go up on stage and sing. It's like super early memories of being on stage with Frank, who played in a band called the Lost World String Band that I was later really inspired by. But I would go see when I was a little older and started to be interested in the guitar. I saw people like Dave Van Ronk, Spider John Corner, Greg Brown, Joel Mabus, John Hartford at these festivals, and the kind of scene around these festivals was one. It's not like the pop realm where people will play their sets and then they'll go back to their tour buses or their hot tubs or whatever. This is music by and for the community, and so a lot of these people, like I would stop and talk to like a 13-year-old kid that was just learning to play guitar. Like I got to talk to Dave Van Ronk and John Hartford and Greg Brown, and John Gorka, when I was just starting playing, and talk to them about what they do, and they took their time to give that to me and tell me some stories, tell me what they did, and so I think just being around music and being around writers. My mom was a poet. My stepdad is a concert promoter and DJ, mostly avant-garde jazz, but we had this huge vinyl record collection in the basement. It was like floor to ceiling, wall to wall. And every day after school, I'd go down and just pull down records. And when I first started playing guitar, it was all the blues records that I was really interested in. Big Bill Brunzi and Lightnin' Hopkins and Blind Blake and Mississippi John Hurt specifically. And I got really into Mississippi John Hurt and found out that he wrote his own songs, and so I kind of was writing in that style for a long time. That was very kind of folk based and trying to write old folk songs more than anything else, and soaking up all these different kinds of folk music, and eventually I think I synthesized all that and kind of created something a little more contemporary. But yeah, it was from my mom being a poet and just talking about words, and then being around a community that was supportive and collaborative, and
right.
That's kind of where all that came from.
Yeah, so you knew it was a possibility. Like, here's people in my community who do
Exactly.
this. I could do
Exactly.
this.
Right.
Yeah. Do you remember what your first song was about?
Yeah, actually I do. I had this sculpture class that I was terrible at. I had no skill whatsoever with like visual or tactile art. And I remember that we had this final I think this was freshman year in high school. We had this final exam that was like he gave you a word and then you were supposed to create a sculpture from that word. This is our final project, I
Oh,
guess you'd say.
okay.
And he was a really, really, really cool teacher. I can't remember his name, but I came to him after class and I was like, "Can I bend the rules a little bit and create a musical sculpture?" Like I'm not, And he was so, you know, supportive and so open that he was like, "Yeah, you want to write a song, go for it." And so my first song was called Sanctum, uh, which is the word that he gave me, and it was I can't remember it at all, but that was quickly pushed aside and I realized that I could do that. It was like this thing that um I'd been playing guitar for a long time and listening to a lot of music and just kind of eagerly soaking all this stuff up. And when that door opened, like I can create this on my own. It was like floodgates, and
Yeah.
I wrote a ton of terrible songs
Oh, yeah.
after that. I was just like, all sorts of terrible songs. I can't even remember how many, but that was my most prolific period where my filter was gone. There was no such thing as editing, and
Yeah.
we just
Yeah.
went to town.
Oh, that's so great. Well, it's so great that there was somebody who could say, like, yes, sure, you can do this. So that you had this assignment and then the door opens and
Yeah, and I think that's it for I it I wish that I wish everybody had somebody like that. I know that I'm lucky and I'm grateful that I had a community like that and a supportive family and supportive friends and a kind of creative artistic community. But I know a lot of people don't. They feel chastised by it, or they feel you know um insecure about sharing, and I fortunately was always given a lot of go ahead,
yeah, yeah,
and I think that's a really big deal.
yeah. No, I think it is. And I talk to a lot of writers and just people who like they can like pinpoint the moment where they shut down, like where
Yeah.
they were ashamed or
Yes.
they, and
Yes.
then they
Yes.
stop.
Right.
But what's interesting about the like creative process, it always comes back. It might not come back for like 10 or 20 years, but it comes
Yep.
back and it's like, hi.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
but anyway, so I love that story. So one of the things that's been happening in this series, we've been talking a lot about like writing practice. Some people get up early and they do morning pages. Other people maybe read something and then write. And a lot's been talked about in terms of like getting in that space.
Yeah.
And one of the things I would love to get more into is just like the nitty gritty
Yeah.
of songwriting, because I feel like, until someone asked me to teach songwriting, if I was working on a song and finished it and someone was like, how did you do it? I'd be like, I don't remember.
Yes.
And so now I remember because I make a point of saying like, oh, at first I was writing in rhyme and then it wasn't coming in rhyme anymore, but I
Hmm.
still got the story down and then I went back and made it rhyme, and my
Yeah.
reasons for that were so that I didn't lose the flow and my other reason is because I didn't want it to just rhyme just for the sake of rhyming. I wanted it to be what I really meant or something like that,
Right.
like
Right.
something really concrete. And I know that before we started recording, you had mentioned something that you talk about is narrative songwriting and mythology. And I
Hmm.
wonder if you'd be willing to kind of get into the nitty gritty of,
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
yeah,
happy to. Yeah.
thank
I think
you.
I resonate with that. I mean, I think that until I started teaching, and and being a student and really like going and I think it was when I first started teaching I was like, okay, I have to explain this kind of amorphous thing to other people. How do I do that? What do I do exactly? And I started to take a closer look because a lot of times it just was it just was something that I've habits that I've learned over time and just kind of came naturally. But how do I translate that into something that's teachable? Because I think a lot of people just see it as this like really mysterious, especially the first creative spark aspect of it, like the muse aspect, is like this really like how am I inspired, so to not try, I guess, to not try to make this too wide. um you know I I think that, yeah, but I guess to start with, we all have these different ways of kind of harnessing that creative power. Like sometimes for me, sometimes as far as ideas go, the kind of
Mhm.
art of it, the muse of it, those ideas sometimes they do just come, but a lot of times I have to kind of get them jump started, and when I'm talking about in classes, when I'm talking about inspiration, it's like, it's all well and good when the ideas are coming to you just like that, from wherever. But when they're not, that's when when you need these like tools. And so for me, it's like, how do I get inspired? How do I come up with ideas? It's listening to music, it's reading books, it's living actively, I think, like, when I say that, like doing everything kind of with an artist's eye, like, you know um I mean, anything can be inspiring, depending on the angle that you're looking at it. And so I do a lot of like, all right, I'm going to take this next hour and really take a look at what's around me. I'm going to go for a walk and like notice things and write them down in a little book. And so it's kind of like, for me, it's building all these little, this notebook of all these little pieces and bits of possible, just soaking all that stuff up. And going to concerts is huge, and talking to
Mm.
people, and I'm a huge, I guess I should say, I'm a terrible eavesdropper. I think that, I
Yeah.
think that like hearing little bits and snippets of other people's conversation for me is like, is I mean, you can always hear something interesting.
Yeah.
And especially if you have a 9 to 5 job, a lot of songwriters are doing this as a hobby, and they've got a 9 to 5 job, and you get kind of stuck in a routine. And for me, a routine like that is not, it doesn't allow, I think, the muse in very,
As
easily. So
easily. Yeah.
right, exactly. So I think that even having like, yeah, not everybody can go to like a songwriting retreat or go to a vacation in Costa Rica or something every, few months to get inspired. So, but you can make little changes in your life, like go to the coffee shop at 9 instead of 10, because maybe
Hmm.
there'll be somebody different there. Maybe you'll see something different on your way. Maybe the traffic will be shifting differently. It'll make you think of the way the water flows, and it'll make you think of the river that you grew up on when you were a kid, and like, so there's all sorts of little tiny changes that I think we can make in our lives. It's not something that I think people should feel pressured about, and like they
Hmm.
need to do something huge, because
Yeah.
that's pressure that's going to stop up the creative flow. And so
Yeah.
it's these tiny little changes, I think, for me, that really help, these little things. So on the inspiration end of it, that's kind of, where that is. And I think for me, um and this is not this is like a generalization, and songs come in a lot of different ways, but when I'm feeling most productive, and when I'm feeling most like I have a plan, and this is going really well, and it's not just like, oh shit, what's going on now,
Hmm.
it's when I farm some kind of idea like that, and I have
Hmm.
some kind of thesis, and then I really do set it up like I'm writing a short story, or like I'm writing a
Mm.
novel, where
Okay.
I'm asking those questions: who, what, when, where, why, like. And
Mm.
that's when I talk about narrative songwriting. I mean, like, really thinking about it's like creative writing 101. It's like,
Yeah.
why shouldn't we do that as songwriters? Like think, even if you're not going to write like the record of Fitzgerald, like, and you're not going to write like a very, totally, story driven song, even if it's a pretty abstract idea, and the language you're using is you know not abstract, but it's not super concrete.
Hmm.
You can you can still have the idea of your characters and your space and your time frame and why, you know. So I, you know, I ask myself, and I have my students ask themselves these questions once they have that thesis, you know, like what this song is going to be about, or what you want your audience to walk away from, or you know, what the then I start making lists, like, all right, who, you know, who's in this song, what, how are these characters, you know, what's the action here, you know, what's the you know, storyline look like, what kind of trope do we have in this song. And when I start asking myself those questions, the who, what, when, where, why, then then I'm much less apt to get stuck. A really
Yeah.
huge problem that I have is getting stuck.
Yep.
And I know a lot of people are like this. Like,
Mm.
if I just start writing, a lot of times this is exactly what will happen. I will like write a verse and a chorus that I really like, and then I'll stop, and it'll just sit there on the page for 2 years or 2 months or
Yeah.
whatever it is, because I'm like totally stuck and I don't know where to go. But if I have first, or maybe even after that, asked myself these questions and really dug into, um, like, set myself in a place, like, okay, this, you know, so I want to sing about, let's say I want to write a song about, you know, a time, and how how my, you know, I see my kid, you know, this is, I'm just kind of coming up with this on top of my head, but you know, I see my kids growing up so fast, and I'm getting older too, and how time shifts so much, and time maybe changes as you get older. It goes by faster, you know. So I want to write a song about time and how tricky it is. So then I start to think about, how am I going to express that, you know, in a way that's relatable. Do I want to do it, you know, autobiographically? Do I want to do it, you know, as a, you know, as a story in itself? Do I want to do it a little more abstract, you know, in an abstract way? And so um, then I started asking myself those questions. So where is this going to be based? Who are the characters? You know, and even if I'm not like, even if it's not that story that I'm writing down, I'll still come back to that, and those characters will interact, and they'll interact with their landscape, and they'll interact with their time, and that's where the action comes from. And if I start doing that, if I really think deeply about it, then I'm much less apt to get stuck. I can always go back to those thoughts about it,
Yeah.
and my outline, and sorry, I'm totally babbling right now.
No, it's so, well, you're basically dropping gold right now. So I just want to like highlight, I just want to highlight what you're saying. So just so people can kind of remember, you know, first of all, you're saying that, you know, you don't necessarily need to go on a vacation to find inspiration. You can
Right.
find inspiration in your ordinary life if you start to
Yes.
look with different eyes, or maybe you're eavesdropping, or you're going to the coffee shop early. I think that's so important. And then this other tool that you're sharing is asking your song or your story who, what, where, when, and why.
Hmm.
And I mean, it seems to me, even if you just wrote those out on a piece of paper and filled it in, you would have so much more to work with. And especially if you're not writing, you're saying that will even work even if you're not using super specific words like Main Street and Ann Arbor,
Right.
Michigan,
Right.
because it will
Exactly.
give like a clear emotional center, and maybe like give you a more of a clear path to work through if you are getting stuck. And I feel like that's something that happens all the time. People come with songs that are 60% done, and they're like, I
Yes.
don't know what to do now. And
Hmm.
it might be because the beginning came really easily. And
Yeah,
this is
and that's
something
the thing.
that, yeah,
That's
writers
totally what
like
happens to me
you.
all the time. You know, if I just start to get inspired and start to write, that's like 90% of the time that's what's going to happen, is I'm going to get stuck. You know, maybe that's just because it's in my brain, but I'll get stuck a third of the way through. And if I go back and I say, all right, what is this song? And that's another thing, is that, like, I ask a lot of people when they play a song for me, I say, you know, after they played it, okay, what's this song about? You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Then they tell you.
if the answer is I don't know, you know, or if the answer is like, you know, I think that it's really important to me. Like, I understand that, like, some things just sound good together, and, you know,
Hmm.
consonants and syllables and rhymes and all that stuff. But for my taste, um, I want even if it's not what I'm getting from the song, I want you to know exactly what you're saying in
Yeah.
this song, and I want you to think about what you want your audience to take away from, even if it's
Yeah.
not what they take away from, even if they take away something
Right.
totally different, which is a gift. It's like, but I want you to think about that stuff. I want you to be really thoughtful about this stuff, and
I think that's
re-
huge, asking what you want the audience to take away. It
yeah,
doesn't necessarily even have to be a thought. It could be a feeling. I want them
yeah,
to feel,
exactly.
and you're right, like they might not feel that, but there's like a clarity
Yeah,
of
yeah, of
delivery,
purpose, of
of
intent,
purpose. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that helps too. And I think that a lot of students that I've found will start with, we talked about rhyme earlier, and I think rhyme is tricky. Rhyme is a trap, because you start out with four lines that are really sound great together, and they rhyme together, and you're like, oh, that's sweet. What the hell does that? What am I saying with this, and where am I going with this? At first it doesn't matter because you're writing these lines that sound great together and they rhyme perfectly, and like they sound really nice while you're playing your guitar or playing piano or whatever. But that's a trap. You get stuck there. And so for me, I think that I ask people, when they're just, like, if we're going to create a song from the bottom up, I ask people to start out by not rhyming. Start out with this bones of, not writing anything that they're not willing to trash, um,
Yeah.
later in the editing process. And,
Yeah.
and not because you can get stuck on something. For me, at least, I can get stuck on something that I really like and not know where to go with it.
Yeah. Absolutely. So the other thing I want to ask you about is you mentioned mythology. I want to jump into that in 1 second. But something that you kind of opened up in me that I think I've had this awareness a few times and it just happened again. But I feel like a lot of writers, and I know I do, will gravitate to a certain like wheelhouse. Like to me, it'll
Hmm.
seem legit to write a song about like love or loss
Hmm.
or something tragic that happened and how I worked through it, or a
Yeah.
story about somebody else and their relationship with a person. But like there are things that I automatically discount without thinking about it. Like what if
Yeah.
I started to write a song about like dropping my kids off at school, or like, because you were talking about like ordinary day. Maybe I
Yeah.
don't want to, maybe that's not interesting, but, or like going to the grocery store, maybe that's not but just to like open up for a second and say, um like why not, like, what I mean, like
Right.
maybe there is something interesting here. And which is one of the things I like about prompts, because I feel like a prompt
Hmm.
will get you to write about something that you wouldn't, it's
Yeah.
almost like we censor, or I do anyway, we censor out stuff without even knowing we're doing it. And
Hmm.
that's what I liked about you saying getting inspiration, just like, if you have a 9 to 5 job, like what someone's
Yeah.
saying, like I
I,
love
I,
that. So
I think it's so tricky because, most of our lives, we tend to write about those like 1% of the moments of our lives that are, or or other people's lives or stories. So much of our art is based on these moments that people have that are like extreme. Whether it's, really high highs or really low lows, but in general, we all kind of live somewhere in the middle.
yeah.
And I'm really interested in finding the magic in the little things, finding the
Yeah.
magic in those ordinary moments, and because there is, so much magic in there. And this album that is coming out in a little bit is very much kind of about that. It's about, um it's a kind of about looking back on a time in my life when I did have a lot of those big highs and lows, and how it's come to be this like very, very sweet kind of, stability in a lot of ways, and appreciating that and looking at that with an artist's eye, because I think there is a lot of beauty in there, and there's a lot of kind of untapped, people just don't write about that very much because they don't know
Hmm.
how to talk about it. And for me, I think it's really interesting, and it's um maybe it's not, maybe it's not I don't know. It's just maybe it's not the sexiest thing in the world, but it's like there's so much there, and it's so much of our um it's so much of what we do day to day, and like
Yeah.
why turn our backs on that to kind of say, oh, these are the moments that we should be regaling, these are the moments that we should
Mhm.
be writing about, these super highs and lows. Why not spend some time really cherishing those, the in-betweens.
I love that. I mean, I feel like people might think, oh, it's not going to be interesting, but I know, like, when I hear a song about something I've never heard before, even just like a silly song about someone's dog or something, I
Hmm.
love it because it's so refreshing
Yeah.
that there's some new ground being covered. In terms of your new album, I know, like, I read a little bit about, but how it's, a hardworking family man and like through the scenes of life. Like, how did you go about it? Did you have like this theme and then you wrote around the theme, or you found that the songs you were writing fit this theme?
Yeah, no, I didn't. I think my next album, I'm going to do that. I think I've decided my next album, I'm going to come with the title first, and then the artwork. Because for some reason, like that's always the most difficult thing for me to find.
I'm going to do that first.
And
Yeah.
then I'll write all the songs around that. That's just but no, this song kind of came. The album kind of it was just the songs that I was writing, and I started when I was writing them. I started to kind of, I had written 5 or 6 of them, and I wrote all these songs in a very. I tend to write all at once. Like I tend to do the exact opposite of what I tell my students to do, where I kind of preach about trying to maintain the craft and try to write some every day, but in all honesty, I don't do that. I like farm inspiration on a daily basis, but I don't
Hmm.
sit down and write on
Hmm.
a daily basis.
So you gather it, it's somewhere where you know that it is, and then you
And
come
then
back to
yeah,
it.
and then a lot of times when I have kind of a sense for yeah, and so I gathered a lot of this stuff, and I was kind of looking at all these. I had written some of the songs, and I had ideas for other songs, and I kind of started looking at it as a whole piece, and then it all kind of came clear what the album was about. So it wasn't really a in the past I've done albums that were a lot more focused and a lot more like this is what specifically what this album is about, and it's
Right.
about this album wasn't like that, but it turned into this thing that was more of a me looking back on my 20s and early 30s and kind of seeing where I've come from and who I am now, and it just kind of became that because of the songs that were involved.
Cool. You might want to put that other earpiece in your
Yeah,
ear because I'm noticing it's making like some background noise.
sorry.
No, no, don't worry at all. I I wanted to ask you something else, which I know we're talking about songwriting, and that's the main focus. But a lot of the people listening obviously will be performing their songs too. And
Yeah.
something that strikes me about you, you always feel very grounded. And I was talking to Mona Tavacola yesterday about she's in Raining Jane, and she helped co-write Jason Mraz's latest album, Yes. And we were talking a lot about confidence because she's
Hmm.
someone I noticed is very comfortable on stage. And I wanted to ask you about, you've had some of these really high profile shows, performing on The Voice or singing with Adam Levine. And is that something that you feel like you just naturally have, or you cultivate? Is there anything that you can offer to performing songwriters on how to feel comfortable?
Yeah. I think that's a tricky one. I think that I so I have a theater background. I have a degree in theater, and that's what I studied when I was in school. And I think that for me, I'm a very private person, and I like my privacy. And I'm in social circles. I can be pretty shy, um, depending on my mood. And so for me, and so when I first started playing, and when I first started playing specifically my own songs, I was totally freaked. I was, deathly afraid of getting on stage in that capacity, even though I would get on stage in front of a ton of people and play some role in Oliver, or whatever it is,
Yeah.
without any problem at all. But it was that aspect of me being there and me putting myself out there,
Yeah.
So I think at first what I did to deal with that was, of course it's just a lot of it is just getting up there again and again and facing that fear, and the more you do it, the more you're going to feel comfortable with it, the more you learn about it, the more you have your thing going, and it gets more comfortable every time you play. But the thing that helped me with it originally was I started to look at it like I was playing a part, and
Oh.
that character that I was on stage was still me, still very much like me, but not totally me.
Ah.
Um, and that kind of triggered my theater background, and
Oh.
I started to think about this kind of like mythic self, basically. I like we're saying, I think a lot about mythology, and I think a lot about um, our mythology and songs, but I also think about um, m- m- me as a performer and a songwriter, and that mythic self, like the mythology, the personal mythology that I've created through my songs and my career and the things that I've done, and that is a little different than who I actually am. And
Ah.
through the years, I've been able to kind of get rid of a lot of that, and kind of I've felt that I've been able to um, show a lot more of me
Mm-hmm.
when I'm performing, because I want to, like, it's a tricky thing, because we want to touch people, as performers, as songwriters, we want our songs to resonate, and when we're on stage, we want to affect people in a really genuine way. At least I
Yeah.
do, and so, but I also am really private, and was freaked by the intimacy of that. um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, it's been this kind of throughout my career, it's been this you know figuring out how much of myself I can really put out there.
I love
uh,
that so much. I
yeah.
think I think I'm going to try that. I mean, I feel like there's something. The way I relate to that is that I remember when I was setting some poems for a friend of mine, and it totally like, and they were her words, and it totally like freed me up to write
Hmm.
in a different way and sing in a
Yes.
different way. And I think I realized that it was because as singer song, I mean, I put so much of myself into the stories I tell on stage
Hmm.
and stuff, but then there's this assumption that everything I sing is always about
Yes.
me,
Yes.
and it's not.
Right.
But no matter, it doesn't matter what I say, it's just, oh, I heard this happen to you,
Hmm.
and so um I love the idea of just like removing, like, what would someone who is really owning the stage or in this moment do?
Right.
Like, I've often wondered, like, would I just be a mess on The Voice? And you just seemed so grounded,
I was a
and
mess.
did you
I was a
use that tool?
total mess.
Yeah, you couldn't tell at all. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, that's who I was then. And that's I relied heavily on that character. It's like, um, which is
That's
so much. It's
cool.
99% like me. But there's a little bit of, it's like, ha- you know, like that character is a little more self-effacing, is a little more like kind of um, a little more openly, like, emotive, I guess.
Hmm.
That character is, so it's just like these tiny little differences that kind
Hmm.
of put me just a little. There's a little buffer in there. There's a little bit of, it's like having a scuba suit on or something. There's a little bit
Yeah.
of water in there that separates that, and
Well, I
depending on the
feel like our genre is the only genre where we kind of don't always do that.
yeah,
It's great to, because every other genre, like if you're in a play or if you're
right,
a pop star, you're always pulling on that like performer,
yeah,
whatever archetype.
right,
And I think, I don't know, at least I do. I forget to draw on that
Mm-hmm.
because, we supposedly have this, like, we're telling our own story all the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And I think
that's
that,
super cool.
yeah, well, I, I, I want to mention something that comes up a lot. Like, we as singer-songwriters, I think we are expected to, or we tend to gravitate toward telling our own story, I think, which is important, and the thing that I've talked to a lot of people about in that respect, when you're writing so autobiographically, is that, um, this kind of left field, but you have to, for me at least, I want people to make sure that, when they're, you know, you, I think you got to take a step back, and that's why these, like, who, what, when, where, why questions, I think, works so well as well. When you're writing a song that's like super personal, what it was, I was I was listening to, this guy Cliff was talking about, I taught at Swananoa Gathering this past summer. It was a really great experience, and oh yeah, Cliff Everhart,
Cliff Everhart. Yeah.
yeah, Cliff Everhart, who's an
Yeah.
amazing guy. You know him.
Yeah. Hmm.
I met him at Swananoa. Was back in the day, he was playing this open mic, and he'd go there, this guy was there that, I can't remember who it was, but he was a really well respected songwriter, and he'd go there, and he'd play, all these songs, and this guy was like really into him. And so he said he went back home, and he had a breakup or something happened to him, and he wrote this like song where he was just like pouring his heart out, just pouring his heart out, and writing like so honestly, he thought, and he thought it was like one of the best things he'd ever written. And he got up on stage and he played this song, and the guy just sat there and didn't usually he was like really vocal about really enjoying his songs. And he came to him afterward, and he was like, "Hey man, what'd you think of that that song?" And and the guy was like, I want, what did he say? Now I'm gonna totally ruin the story, but it was like, I want you to tell me, I want you to read from my diary. I don't want to hear your diary.
Totally.
I don't want to. And so I think it's really important that we take a step back from the stuff that really touches a nerve in us that we've written, and um, make sure that it's going to resonate in the right way, and make sure that it's not. It's okay to write to just get it out, but sometimes maybe that those songs should just stay at home.
Yeah.
That this should just be for you. And
Yeah.
I think that you got to make sure that the songs you're writing are going to touch other people. You're going to resonate with
Yeah.
other people, and mean something, and not just be, just mean something to you.
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like our number one job is to invite in the listener. And I
Right.
feel like something that happens if the story is too personal and it's not made up or about somebody else um, is that a lot of times you'll have pictures in your own mind of what the line means to you, but you're not
Right.
actually conveying those pictures.
Exactly.
And so it's really moving to you because you have a story in your head, but you have to make sure that what's on the page is actually like,
Yeah, I think that's it. That's a great way of saying that.
giving
Sorry,
that
that was a
away.
little left field. But.
No, I mean, I think it's critical, just, yeah, dropping more gold. So anyway, I want to keep time in mind and stuff,
Yeah.
your time and listeners' time. So there's one other thing that was kind of on my mind. I'm hoping you'll play another song for us before we leave. But I don't know much about it. I've been thinking a lot about music and social change, and what are I know you went to Israel. I'm not exactly sure what you did there. I know that there are, I'm just really interested in what are the limits to what we can expect a song to be able to do. Like, can it actually change someone's behavior at a show, inspiring them? I'm wondering how you view it, what your experience is, what you think.
Yeah, I think that, my career has always been tied to my values. It's just something that has always been. And, there's people out there that are more that way than I am. But it's something that I have, I grew up, in a very, like super leftist household, and I like come from a union family. I kind of grew up on picket lines and you know, talking about social justice, talking about you know, in my Jewish heritage, talking about freedom from slavery, and talking about, you know, I mean, there's a lot of those kind of themes that I dealt with when I was a kid, and my mom and dad were both revolutionaries in the '60s, and so I kind of came from that stock, and and also just being in the folk realm, you know, people like Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie and Mavis Staples and you know, the list goes on, of course. Who's used music as a beat to march to, and a gathering point. And I think that for me, that really resonates with me, and I've always wanted my music to be in line with my values. So I have not just in my writing, but I've you know, used my skills to work with a bunch of different nonprofit organizations I that line up with my ethics. And you know, groups for equality, civil rights, you know, LGBTQ rights, and fair trade, and environmental groups, and I think building those communities has been really enriching for me. Like, to work with, you know, to be, you know, um, to work at something bigger than myself.
Mhm.
To use my work to you know, affect something a little bigger has been really important to me.
Are the main
But
ways that you're doing that, like you're performing at their events, or you're speaking up at, you know, you're willing to share your music?
yeah, and I think there's that, but then there's also on the other end of it, and I'm a lot more subtle. I'm a pretty subtle when it comes to social stuff, but I will, you know, I at my shows, I, you know, talk about the things that are important to me.
Hmm.
You know, and I play some songs that are inspired by events, or inspired by movements, or inspired by things that I've done. I don't do a lot of like soapbox preaching, you know,
Hmm.
because I don't like when people do that to me.
Hmm.
But I try to make it very personal, and say, this is what's been going on with me. This is what the song was about. You know, here's what I was thinking when I wrote it. And so I have written a lot of songs about, you know, environmental efforts, and but it's all very personal stuff. So, for instance, this the album that I came out with before this one was called "The Miracle of Birds," and it's based on my travels in the Middle East with this great nonprofit called On the Ground. And we worked this thing out where they did this event that was focused on. It was called the Run Across Palestine. It was focused on supporting fair trade olive farming communities in the West Bank, Palestinian olive farmers. And we did this event over there, and they brought me along as kind of like a cultural emissary in some ways. And so I kind of brought my songs and stories there, and I met up with all these different artists and community leaders, and we put on these cultural exchanges in the evenings. And I got to meet
Mm.
people, Israelis and Palestinians, and kind of through art, you know, try to build some bridges. And I came back and
Wow.
I made this record based on the experience. And so in a lot of ways, that was really cool. One, I got to take this trip that I otherwise would never have taken ever. I'm a Jew. I was hanging out in the West Bank with a bunch of Palestinians.
Yeah.
I got to make a lot of friends I would never have made. I got to be inspired in a really interesting way. Um, I got to come back and make an album that I'm really proud of,
Yeah.
and that speaks to me in a very strong way. I got to present it in front of a lot of people, but I also, you know, they were kind of like my record label for the album. So I wouldn't have even made the album if it weren't for them.
Yeah.
They, you know, so it's kind of this really interesting framework um, for kind of a new kind of record label that is based on values rather than um, based on values and community rather than based on income, you know, and profit. So it was an incredible experience in a lot of different ways.
Wow,
But
that's so cool. So you're
yeah,
basically writing about your experiences there, and you're there as a bridge builder, and then you come back with an album full of songs
yeah,
to
and
share
half the
with
proceeds of the
us.
songs go back to the organization. So it worked out really well.
Wow.
But I think that, you know, that's the kind of thing that happens because I've been doing this for a long time and working with my, values in mind, for a
Did
long
that
time.
organization find you, or did you find them?
They came to me with the idea. I had known them because of playing different, events that they were involved in
Mm-hmm.
over a few years.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's such
So
a great
yes.
story.
So I think that we have a lot of power as performers. We're up in front of a lot of people, and I think that right now, especially, for me, it's important to use my voice in the best way possible. But it's a tricky thing because I don't want to create more division, but
Yeah.
I also want to be honest, as far as who I am and how I see the world. And even if I don't talk about it, you're going to hear it in my songs. And I've gotten a lot of shit from, especially a lot of people that found out about me through The Voice. You know, huge social media following, and every time I post something that is in any way political, it's like there's,
sorry.
it's like this whole huge list of rants against me, and
Oh man.
I just expect that. That's okay,
Yeah.
that's how we are right now in this country, and that's how it's going to be. And if I can change a few lines, then I'm doing all right.
Yeah, and I feel like right now when there are so many choices, there's so many ways we could help out. Like every 2 minutes you hear about an organization that, it's like
true.
almost overwhelming. And I feel like when I think about what is my role as a performer, I think like, I remember hearing like Ani DeFranco, and it wasn't even the content of her songs. I remember hearing her in New York when I was a long time ago, when I was depressed but didn't know I was depressed. And like just the energy of the show, like the next day I had so much energy. I just like wrote like 3 songs. And I think of that in terms of social change, like if I can give away some positive energy so that people could maybe choose, like, okay, I was overwhelmed, there were 10 things I could do. I could call my senator, or I could like plant a tree. Maybe I have the energy to pick one now, or I don't know. Like I think of it really almost like on this small level, because I don't know, I guess that's where I think it all starts, is with small things. But anyway, will you thank you so much for sharing. Will you send us off with tell us a brief story about how you wrote a particular song? And
since we were just talking about it, I can play a song from my last album. Hold on, so I think that this is a song from Miracle Birds, and it's a song that I wrote. Just a second here. It's a song that I wrote. So a big part of the trip, we would go from through these little, all these different farming villages in the West Bank, and a lot of them were surrounded by Israeli settlements, and it was like really, there's a lot of conflict going on in these areas. And we had stopped the second day of the trip. We stopped in this village called Atuani, Atuani, and I one of the things we did was we brought, these are olive farming communities, and their olive trees are getting ripped out all the time, and these, a lot of times the trees don't bear fruit until they're pretty mature, and so when the olive trees are ripped out, it's like a generation's worth of income and food that gets kind of torn away.
Oh wow!
It's really amazing. The situation over there is like it's wild. So we would bring these olive saplings to these fields, these little farming villages, and plant them. That was one of the things we did. And we were in this village, and it was we went down to this olive grove, and we were met with this huge line of Israeli Defense Force soldiers in full riot gear, and we were with a bunch of Palestinians and some Israelis that were like more left-leaning, with all these olive saplings, and I was sitting on this hill talking to one of the Israelis, and a bunch of folks got into this like scuffle, and then all of a sudden there was like stones thrown and like concussion grenades and tear gas, and it was like a total chaos there. And it was so sad because these two peoples are so similar in so many ways. And I was like looking out over this beautiful orchard and just thinking, like, you know, just how alike we are, and how much different as well. And like we were saying earlier, I do a lot of work. You know, I think a lot about mythology in my writing, and there's this character in Jewish mysticism called the shyness. She's the kind of the female essence of God, supposedly, and she comes to us and on Shabbat, on the day of rest and the Sabbath, and allows us to rest a little bit and to kind of reflect on the week. And she's also known as the Sabbath bride. So like the female essence of God and the male essence of God kind of have a union. And then we're left with the female essence of God for Shabbat. So there's a lot of wedding imagery in this song. I kind of brought her into the piece to kind of look at the situation and maybe see what she thought of it. Get her
her
ideas.
take on it.
Yeah, and so that's a lot of times what I'll do is kind of use those old stories as a mythology, as a landscape, or as a way to kind of get another set of eyes on it, imagine what, how they would react. So anyway, I'll play the song.
I want it to sound good. I don't know if you want it to, it keeps bumping, and I don't know if it will, but I just want it to sound good.
Yes, I agree. Here, maybe if I I don't know if is that any better?
For now, yeah.
All right, I'll try not to move around.
Maybe not. Maybe put it back. I think that's
okay. All right.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, we're trying to get it right.
The limits of.
Yes. Here, maybe we can do this. Maybe this will be better if I put it out in front. No, maybe not. All right. We'll see what we can. I'll try not to move too much.
Okay.
Is that all right?
It's good right now. Yeah.
That's called The House of Princes. Wedding songs drifted through the streets of the house of princes. The wind rose up and blew the clouds back home to rest. We gathered in the garden in the midday heat in the house of princes. A silhouette of Jerusalem sage danced like a drunken guest in the house of princes. With two candles intertwined in the house of princes. Down at the picket line in the house of princes. Standing in the orchard side by side. Oh, what a welcome. What a welcome for the bride. Walk down to the fields in the house of princes. On my left, the ancient crooked tree. Out of oil anointed the shields in the house of princes. On my right, perfect lines of soldiers stood at ease in the house of princes. The two candles intertwined in the house of princes. Down at the picket line in the house of princes. Standing in the orchard side by side. Oh, what a welcome. Yeah, how can I greet my Sabbath bride in the house of princes, tear gas and the stones up above. Before moonrise in the house of princes, I caught a glimpse of her weeping for loss. Her tears for loneliness are broken, fell upon the flags of fur. Fell upon my left and right. Felt the darkness and the light. Felt all sense of pleasure and pain. Oh, the holy and profane. Fell upon my hands and face. Fell right down in the sacred place. And as all the sacred people here fed upon each other's feet, I saw 3 lonely stars. It was a cold, clear night in the house of Princess. I'm talking with my baby on the phone, so far away. The stars were shining their sweet light in the house of Princess. I watched the blockades flicker through 1,000 shades of gray.
Oh, I love that song. I remember.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for playing that. And for everyone listening, please go check out the proper recordings of Joshua Davis. You can visit joshuadavismusic.com and find him there and on iTunes. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ann. I appreciate you coming to.
Yeah, really nice talking to you. And till next time.
All right.
Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you know someone who would enjoy or benefit from this podcast, please share it with them. Thanks so much. Much love.